Good afternoon. Happy third Sunday of Lent. I can't believe that we're already that far along. The last few videos, I have mentioned C.S. Lewis's famous trilemma. When we consider Jesus and the radical things that he said, the things that he claimed, that he was God himself, ultimately we're left with three options. He was a liar, he was a lunatic, or he was, in fact, Lord. Three options. Now, I don't think that Jesus would have lied and then have been willing to die for that lie. And as I mentioned last time, his Christianity took off in a way that no sect based on the charisma of a particular founder who managed to bamboozle folks ever did. It seems that we have to consider that third option, that Jesus in fact was who he claimed, that is, he was Lord. So we look at his evidence. And last video, I talked about the resurrection, and I considered the other options, that Jesus had been spirited away, that his believers somehow thought that he lived on in their hearts, but that he didn't really rise, or that there was some mass hallucination or mass attempt to lie about Jesus. And all these options seem so unlikely that I think ultimately we have to conclude that there has to be something to this. At least what is clear is we can't take Jesus to be some moral teacher whom we can admire. If that's what we're looking, we need to steer clear of Jesus, because he was crazy. He had to have been crazy in order to say the things that he did. We can't just take him as some sort of moral teacher. So ultimately, what we're left with is a crossroads. And here we have something of a leap of faith. This is not something we can prove as if it's some scientific experiment. He was Lord or he wasn't Lord. Ultimately, you have to make a choice based on the evidence that is presented. Either Jesus was Lord or he wasn't Lord. And when we make choices in practical everyday life, we don't always have all the information, but we have to take a leap of faith. If the door looks open, you trust your eyes and take that leap of faith and cross through the door. So why would we choose Jesus as Lord? I wanted to present to you another philosopher today. His name was Blaise Pascal, and he lived in the 17th century. He was a philosopher, yes. He was a mathematician. He was a developer of probability theory. And he had something he called the wager. Today we call it Pascal's wager. And ultimately he said that in this choice, we have on the one hand, we could live as if God didn't exist, assuming he didn't exist. And on the other hand, we could assume that he does exist. And we need to consider what the ultimate rewards would be on the one side and on the other. If we live as if God doesn't exist, and it turns out that he did, well then, what are we left with? We have whatever it is that we're able to accomplish in this, our earthly life, and then that's it. And as we already covered in the earlier videos, yes, you can find some meaning in life, but ultimately, we're called to something more. We're restless. We want something more. We yearn for something more. Well, what is there on the other side of this wager? And that is that God does exist. And if, in fact, that end of the wager turns out to be true, and we choose to live as if God exists, the reward is infinite. So we have a wager. And Pascal said it only makes sense that we live as if God exists, even if we cannot actually prove that he exists. See, Pascal was well aware of the scientific method. He knew that you cannot prove God's existence. And he was arguing not so much that God exists, but that we ought to believe he exists, because it is the only wager with an infinite good on the one end of it. And ultimately, that is what matters. So the resurrection is not something like God's existence itself that we can prove in a Loctite manner, but it is a wager that we ought to take, given everything that we've presented thus far. Have a good Sunday. God bless.